What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Fantasy Six Pack Network. I'm your host, Dylan Clemons. Beside me is my co-host for today, Joe Bond. Founder of Fantasy Six Pack, and today we are starting out our training camp check-in shows where we are going around to all 32 NFL teams and interviewing a beat writer or reporter for each team on what they've seen or heard at training camp. To kick us off, we are discussing the Green Bay Packers, and we have Paul Bretl from ESPN Lacrosse, Wisconsin to help us do that. Paul, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing on this Packers training camp day off?
Yeah, I'm doing excellent. I appreciate you guys having me. Happy to talk Packers.
Awesome. Before we jump into things, into the interview, I want to remind everybody, please hit that like button. Please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for notifications so you know when we have a new video drop. And then head on over to fantasy6pack.net/plans to become an all-access member where you get access to our award-winning rankings, draft cheat sheets, and our F6P Discord where you could ask us all your custom league questions. And right now, you could use promo code F6P NFL24 for 15% off. So once again, that's fantasy6pack.net/plans. Go ahead and check that out. But without further ado, Joe, how about you hit Paul with the first question we have for him today?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So obviously the big name on the team just got signed to the fat contract. Jordan Love had a great 2023 overall. Had a couple, little bit of a mid-season slump, I guess. Came out strong, then finished really strong. What have you seen in camp so far is sort of his biggest improvements, and do you see him taking another big step forward this year?
Yeah, I do think he's definitely positioned well to take a step forward. And after we had those 4 or 5 practices, whatever it was, before he got back out on the field, and then seeing him on the field, again, it's been a small sample size that we've seen from him on the practice field so far, but where you really notice where Jordan Love sets himself apart, not just from the other quarterbacks on the Packers roster, but I think, across the position group, is his command of the offense. And Matt LaFleur talked about this before. I think it was his first practice back last Saturday, is just him knowing the ins and outs of it. And there's just a few examples of that. And these aren't necessarily highlight plays. There was one play where Carl Brooks, the Packers defensive tackle, busted through the offensive line almost immediately. I mean, it was a really, really great pass rush. But Jordan Love's ability to recognize that, to escape it, and to know where everyone's going to be on the field so he can just get the ball out of his hands to Josh Jacobs in the flat. Again, it was a 5, 6, maybe 7-yard completion. But there's a lot of quarterbacks where when that happens, that's a sack. So you're going from a 5, 6-yard loss to a 5, 6-yard gain. And it's those little nuances of the position that has really helped separate him. We really started to see that during the second half of last season. I think back to that touchdown pass to Dontavion Wicks in the playoffs against the Dallas Cowboys. Mm-hmm. From start to finish, that was just top level processing of the quarterback position, identifying that the blitz is coming, changing the protections at the line of scrimmage. There was still a blitzer who got through, knowing he had time, knowing he needed to take time for a longer developing route to happen, remained calm, stayed in the pocket, got the ball out with his quick release, put it on target to Dontavion Wicks. Again, that's just a prime example of someone who's in complete control of the offense. And I think as we go through these training camp practices, as you enter the regular season and he gets even more and more of those reps, we're going to see that added comfort. And I really think that's going to be a big catalyst for him in terms of taking another step forward after what we saw last season. And there was another play during Thursday's practice. Lucas Van Ness, Packers defensive end, he ran a stunt coming up the middle and got through the line. But again, Jordan Love's quick release, his recognition of it, knowing based on where the coverage was that he had Christian Watson down the seam, is just a quick flick of the wrist, boom, big play in the passing game. So it's just that command, that understanding, that experience, those reps, I really think is going to be pivotal in helping him take another step forward this season.
Absolutely. And the more and more he sees, the better and better he's going to get as well. But switching over to the running back position now, the Packers prized free agency acquisition, Josh Jacobs coming over from the Las Vegas Raiders, who's coming off a little bit of a down year with him dealing with injuries. But when Jacobs really thrived in Las Vegas was when he saw a massive amount of volume. So, Paul, I got a two-part question for you. How healthy has Josh Jacobs looked throughout this training camp? And do you see him seeing a big workload? Like, he saw 75% of the snaps with the Raiders when he was really thriving with them. Do you see him getting that type of workload, or do you see more of a prominent role from the rookie Marshawn Lloyd or AJ Dillon in this backfield?
Yeah, so judging the running backs out the gate here has been difficult. One, when the pads aren't on, the offensive line's at a massive disadvantage. And two, I alluded to it earlier with some of those plays that Jordan Love was navigating. The defensive pass rush and defensive front as a whole has been really, really good. It's been tough sledding for the running backs here early on in training camp. But during Tuesday's practice, Wednesday's practice, we saw some of those, Josh Jacobs runs that we've seen so many highlights of. He did miss Thursday's practice, but he said it was just a tweak. He said if it was a game day, he'd be out there playing. So he's been healthy. He's been a part of these practices up to this point. And as far as what his workload's going to look like, we look back at Aaron Jones' time here in Green Bay, and I think more often than not, he was in maybe 50% of the snaps, maybe towards the higher end 60. I tend to think that's going to be closer to where Josh Jacobs is. In part, the Packers' decision and how they utilized Jones was making sure that he stayed healthy for the entire season and just being mindful of his workload. But I also think that that's a bit of an organizational philosophy to a degree. And I think that it's going to be applied to Josh Jacobs a little bit. Now, I think where the difference could be is that if there's a game that requires Jacobs to carry the ball 20, 23, 25 times, I think they'll be more willing to give him that opportunity to do that. But like I said, I don't necessarily think that that's going to be an every week thing. I don't think that they're going to be relying on him to carry the ball 25 times. I think it's going to be, how's the game unfolding? What's the game plan? And it's really going to be a week to week thing because, again, you have a really potent passing game too. And Josh Jacobs' success, again, Jordan Love, this group of pass catchers that they have, this should be a really, really good offense this season. But to me, Josh Jacobs' success in the run game is going to determine the ceiling. How high, how good can this offense be? And the reason I say that is because the ability to marry the run game with the passing game just unlocks a whole new dimension, not just for the Packers. This is the football in general. When you have a run game to lean on and you're in 2nd and 4, 3rd and 2, that opens up opportunities in the passing game. That opens up the playbook for Matt LaFleur. You're not behind the sticks. The defense can't just pin their ears back and come get after the quarterback. So also opens up play action opportunities where Jordan Love in this passing game was really, really good last season. So Josh Jacobs' success this season, like I said, I think is going to be an important element to determining, again, this offense should be good regardless, but how good can they be?
Yeah, absolutely. The run game for the Packers has been good for years. Hopefully he can keep it going for them and opening up this pass offense and jumping over to this passing attack here, especially, this is a crowded receiver room, right? And it seems like there's no real alpha dog, right? Like when you look at some of these teams, they got Justin Jefferson, right? They've got the guy. The Packers just have a bunch of guys. And they're all good, but who have you seen in camp that has been the best? And and then the second part is Jayden Reed on the field with these 2 wide receiver sets, or has he been out so far?
I mean, the honest question to who's been the best is pick a day. Seriously. Tuesday, Wednesday, it was Romeo Doubs' term. I mean, in the one-on-ones against Jair, in the 2-minute drill, he was the guy. Terrific catches, getting open. Thursday's practice, 2-minute drill, is Dontavion Wicks' turn. They had, I think, during the 2-minute portion, they ran 6 passing plays. The starting offense got off, and 4 of them went to Dontavion Wicks. Had a 13-yard reception, a 26-yard reception, drew a penalty to help them set up 1st and goal. I mean, seriously, it feels like it's a cop-out answer to a degree, but it really has been someone different each day. And obviously this is a fantasy football show here. So I know that becomes challenging to kind of pick and choose who you're going to rely on each week, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I think it's going to be game plan specific. There's going to be guys who are just really hot at the moment. There's going to be guys who are getting open more often than others, and that's where the ball is going to go. And that's last year, that was really a big strength of this team. Don't get me wrong. There's a ton of value in having that guy, that Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams when he was here. Of course, that's extremely valuable. But when you have 4 or 5, or sometimes at some points last season, literally 6 receivers that were getting the ball in key situations, and that's a credit to Jordan Love too. He goes where the defense dictates. He goes where the play dictates. That's where the ball's going. We saw Malik Heath, who was an undrafted rookie last season, made the 53-man roster. I mean, he caught a touchdown in the final minutes of that Giants game I think gave Green Bay the lead, which they ended up giving up, but gave them the lead nonetheless. Like, Jordan Love will go where the defense dictates. And from the defensive perspective, that's really challenging to guard.
Yeah.
You have to defend the entire field. You can't focus in on this one guy or even 2 guys. You got to be mindful of all 4. So that's one-on-one matchups. That's more space for the offense to operate in. And again, I really think we saw that be a benefit to this offense last season. And I expect it to be this year as well. Now, they certainly have talented guys who could emerge as the number 1 receiver on this Packers team. But like I said, early on in training camp, who's stepped up each day in practice, and even to your question about reading the 2 receiver sets, like every day, the start of the team period or the start of the 2-minute drill, they're coming out with a different group of receivers. I mean, you're seeing everybody getting opportunities. So it's a really, really hard question to answer, but everybody's been getting involved. Everybody's had their moments so far. And again, I think that's a big strength for this team.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big strength for them as far as winning games, but it's exactly the answer that I expected to hear, honestly. And you can see that in fantasy drafts, like Jayden Reed, and is typically the main guy going off first, but it's still late enough where you're like, oh, that the question mark is there for all of them. So yeah. All right, Dylan.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Jumping over to the defensive side of the ball, and this question intrigues me a little bit for you, Paul, because I live in Wisconsin, so I am around a lot of Packer fans. And towards the end of Joe Barry's tenure last year, it was hard for me to find someone who enjoyed watching his defense play football or him call defensive plays. During camp, what has been the biggest difference from going from Joe Barry to Jeff Halfly?
So what we've seen so far, especially in like the 2-minute portion, we're really seeing this defense try to do the dictating, rather than sitting back and try to keep everything in front of them. We're seeing linebacker blitzes. In general, from a coverage standpoint, we're seeing more cover 1, which is a staple of what Jeff Halfly did during his time at Boston College. We're seeing a lot of movement from the safety position as well. Pre-snap movement, even some post-snap movement to disguise coverages with the safeties moving back, dropping into the box, other parts of the field. So those have been 2 big differences. I'll also say the play along the defensive front. I mean, they're going from a read and react approach where under Joe Barry, each defender was responsible for 2 gaps. And again, there's a, as it says, read and react. So what's the offensive line doing? What's the backfield doing? Which of my 2 gaps is most vulnerable? And that's the one I got to protect. Under Jeff Halfly, it is get off the ball, go get the ball. And the phrase that we've heard over and over again is it's an attacking front. It is just get into the backfield. It is about TFLs and sacks. That is what this defensive play style is about. And as I alluded to earlier, we're seeing that from this front. I mean, they've been extremely, extremely disruptive. And there was several of those practices when Jordan Love wasn't in there where Sean Clifford or Michael Pratt are having to deal with that pass rush. And it was extremely difficult to evaluate the offensive side of the ball because when there's instant pressure, I mean, even for some top tier quarterbacks, like that's tough. That makes life so much more challenging. So the play of the defensive front has been, again, that play style, and we're seeing the results of it. Of course, we got to get more larger sample size with the pads on, carry into the regular season, all that stuff. But those are some of the noticeable differences. And one other big difference that we've seen is this Packers defense, the secondary specifically, they really struggled with making plays on the football last season. I think they were 23rd in passes defense. They had 7 interceptions, which was the second and fewest in football. And I think Jeff Halfly's defense, and from what we've seen so far from a results standpoint, is going to do a better job of putting those players in positions to make plays on the football. Jeff Halfly, not just by his current players, but he was I believe, defensive backs coach in San Francisco when Richard Sherman was there. I mean, Richard Sherman is has spoken very, very highly about Hafley and his ability as a teacher. And we hear the term, I don't like throwing around the word simplified, because like I said, there's still disguises. There's still a ton of nuance to this defense. Not that it's simple, but what Jeff Hafley does, and from what we've been able to glean and heard from past players, is with his ability as a teacher, he's really, really good about recognizing, all right, what, with the time frame that we have, what can we implement so my guys just go out there and play fast? Because that's the goal at the end of the day. I mean, Hafley has said, I can draw up the best game plan ever on paper, but if it's not implemented correctly, it doesn't much matter at that point. So his ability to create these game plans that still allow the guys to play fast, physical, make those plays on the football, I think has been a big factor in the early ball production we've seen as well.
I love to hear that. With us, with fantasy football, I love to hear the aggressiveness to taking the ball away now with this defense, and with the defensive front being aggressive and really going after him. Hopefully that creates more sacks, which we love for fantasy football.
Absolutely.
As well.
All right, so we are a fantasy focused channel here, so we got to ask one sort of fantasy question. So we're going to ask this to all the beat writers that we're going to interview here. And it's, who is the player that has surprised you at camp, good or bad, that fantasy managers need to know about?
It's a great question. Honestly, the player who's really stood out on offense, and from a fantasy perspective, I'm not sure what the impact might be, or if any, because it's at the receiver position. It's a super crowded room, but Grant DeBose, he was a 7th-round pick by the Packers in 2023. He was injured for all of offseason programs last year. I don't think he came back until the second preseason game. So just from a rookie coming in, not having the opportunity to be on the practice field, was behind it a little bit. And so he spent all of last season on the practice squad. But going back to OTAs, going back to mini camp, you saw someone on the football field. We hear about that year 2 jump. The familiarity with the offense, the continuity. You've had a full offseason to focus on your craft rather than preparing for the draft. And so, he looked like such a much more refined football player, and working with the second team offense, working with the third team offense during OTAs and minicamp. He was a favorite target of Sean Clifford's and Michael Pratt's. And then now, as we've gotten into training camp, 9 practices in, especially as of late, feels like he has a catch or 2 each day. Especially during the team portion. And again, so with the second team offense, during I think it was Wednesday's practice, he had what I thought was the play of the day. It was a free play. Clifford drew the offsides. DeBose goes deep down the sideline. It was a well-placed ball by Clifford between the 2 safeties, but DeBose just went up and got it at the highest point, brought it down. And so he's making those plays. And like I said, it's a crowded wide receiver room. Not sitting here saying he's going to be on the 53-man roster. It's either going to require to do that. It's going to require the Packers to keep 7 receivers, which is going very heavy, or he's going to have to unseat someone on the back end of that depth chart. And so, but he's off to a really, really good start. And as we look at the receiver position and fighting for a roster spot, obviously there's a prerequisite for what you have to do when the ball's coming your way, catches you have to make, plays you have to make with the ball in your hands. But those other important factors are going to be special teams. That's going to be an important factor. His ability to contribute in the run game. We all know, those who cover the Packers, those who watch the Packers, know how important blocking at the receiver position is to Matt LaFleur's offense. So those are other areas where he's going to have to stand out, where he's going to have to shine in order to continue to really make that roster push. So that's who's really stood out in my mind. And I know that's not necessarily maybe the big name. No,
that's perfect.
But as we look at this roster, there was very little turnover from last year to this year. Yeah. I think I saw it over the cap that almost like 80% of the 2023 team is still here. I think that's the second highest rate in football. So as we look at opportunities that are out there, in the passing game and the running game, like as far as for new players to step in, obviously you hope their strides made because it is a young team. You want to see Reed and Wicks make a year 2 leap. You want to see Watson and Doubs make a leap in year 3. Of course, all that stuff there. But in terms of playing time, in terms of opportunities, it feels like a lot of that stuff is already accounted for to a degree.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. I mean, that's exactly what this question was for, to kind of find those diamonds in the rough, those guys that, nobody's really talking about. So that was perfect. But anyway, this was fantastic. Thank you for coming on, Paul. Before we end the show, just let everybody know where they can find you and what you're working on.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. You can find all my work over at ESPN Lacrosse. For Wisconsin sports fans, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. Sports radio all day. Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, news, everything you need.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, that is it for our first training camp check-in. We will see you all again soon. Bye.
Thanks, Paul.